Thank you, President. As part of his budget reply speech on the 14th of May, my colleague and friend Stuart Aubrey, the member for Scarborough, told of his personal experience of coercive control in a previous relationship. This is a story and a personal experience that informs his strong advocacy for services for people experiencing family and domestic violence. The member for Scarborough and I had walked together earlier this year in a march against men's violence towards women. Founded by What Were You Wearing Australia, an Indigenous youth-led charity fighting to end sexual violence in this country, the march, which takes place in every state and territory, is one part in their work to change the narrative around domestic and sexual violence. The founder, Sarah Williams, brought the original What Were You Wearing exhibition to Australia, collecting over 9,000 survivor stories, voices that are too often ignored or silenced. When survivors of sexual violence disclose their stories, they are often asked, "What were you wearing?" as if clothing determines consent. The What Were You Wearing exhibit fights back against rape myths by displaying clothing survivors wore when assaulted, showing that clothing does not equate to consent. If you've not viewed the exhibition, there is a selection of clothing available on their website. It can be quite confronting because the clothing ranges from things like pyjamas, including children's pyjamas, to school uniforms, to Toy Story onesies, to jeans, to nursing scrubs. So I know then that the member for Scarborough is a genuine ally of survivors of family and domestic violence and sexual violence. He is an ally to women, an ally to survivors, and he has lived the experience, both through his personal story, but also the stories that he has heard from his community through his regular engagement with Scarborough Police, to complex family care arrangements in local schools, and the direct requests for support and assistance that come to his office. So when his campaign for permanent funding for a refuge that would serve his community was questioned in this chamber as somehow being disingenuous, I asked his permission to read part of his budget reply speech in tonight. Because before we make assumptions about people, about community campaigns, when we might imagine that a minister needs to understand that there is community support for a commitment, when we can also use those community campaigns to demonstrate not only that support, but also to educate people about things like family and domestic violence, and when we consider that family and domestic violence can happen to anyone in any kind of relationship, then perhaps we should demonstrate our own integrity by first checking our assumptions. There is a little saying about what assumptions make of us. So in the member for Scarborough's own words, "A strong community supports people when they are most vulnerable and helps everyone feel safe, respected and included. Family and domestic violence remains one of the most urgent challenges facing our state. Before entering Parliament, I experienced coercive control and domestic violence within a relationship. It took me a long time to fully understand what had happened and even longer to feel ready to speak about it publicly. What began with coercive control eventually escalated into physical violence, resulting in me calling 000 for the first time in my life on my partner. That experience shaped my understanding of how complex, isolating and dangerous these situations can become, and why having somewhere safe to go matters so much. Making the temporary refuge in my community permanent will ensure women and children in crisis have greater access to that safety, support and stability in our community. I'm proud of the over 900 local community members who backed my call to make it permanent, and the victim survivors who came forward to share their stories with me and help push for this outcome. I'm incredibly proud of the team at Stirling Women's Centre, which has supported women and children fleeing domestic violence in our community for more than 40 years. I'm proud of the Minister for the Prevention of Family and Domestic Violence for listening and delivering for my community. I'm deeply proud of the Cook Labor government for investing $18.1 million in securing a permanent refuge in my community. Upon delivery, along with the $22.5 million upgrade of the Stirling Women's Centre, there will be a six-fold increase of refuge capacity in Perth's northern suburbs. So I finish then by thanking the member for Scarborough for his genuine and compassionate advocacy for women fleeing family and domestic violence. For that advocacy has provided women in his community increased safety by expanding their access to refuge accommodation. a significant achievement and an actual delivery for our community.